Hi, Michelle.
Hey, how are you? Hey, everyone.
I'm good. How are you doing today? How are you doing in this whole virtual symposium?
I'm doing great. It's been really nice to see everybody's presentations and a lot of commonalities to all the presentations, which is right on point.
There's a bit of a theme I realize across most of the things that are happening, people talking,
Yeah.
which actually might fit in well to like our little discussion that's going to happen.
Yeah, there's a lot
Okay.
of things I think that were previously discussed. And actually, so I guess I should introduce I'm Michelle Frantellizzi. I was most recently working with HOK, but my experience is I'm a senior design professional, almost architect, with a focus in sports and entertainment design. So I work on a lot of large scale projects related to sports and entertainment, not solely on sports and entertainment, but I use a lot of the computational design processes throughout my design phases and working in collaborations with a lot of consultants and other specialists that we've heard from today.
Yeah, that's really interesting, especially since you're focusing on sports and entertainment, right? Specifically, which
Yeah.
I guess the idea of tying competition or design to that is kind of it's not new, but it's also I think personally is an interesting topic because it's not something you hear about too often. So I guess to start off, like what brought you to tie those two things together, sports design and computational design?
I think they inherently work really well together. Sports design traditionally has a lot of formulaic things that, such as stadium bowl design, that have been calculated to work with the way that people and spectators view and interact with the event that's happening. I think allowing computational and parametric design into sports design allows us to not only iterate and really hone down on some of the efficiencies of some of the designs that we're working on, but it allows us to, as designers at the early design phase, just have a little bit more freedom and play. So I think with such a large scale project, it's important in a competition setting to move quickly and be able to take your design elements and work them into other parts of your design aspect if needed to be. So from the beginning, you're already looking at how does my overall form potentially tie into the structure, which connects to the bowl, which then informs how you're viewing your sport. So I think a lot goes into it from the beginning that you can kind of set up the logic where one part of the design can inform the other part of the design. And that's where parametric design really comes into play there, because you can connect these inputs in a way that has a little bit of more intelligence to it than your traditional, I'm going to draw this once, look at two things adjacent and evaluate them side by side. You can have a little bit more real-time data on how many seats there are, how many aisles and access to the restrooms there are. They're very logistical things, not just design moves that you're making, but at the same time, the design moves can inform the outputs that you're getting from those very calculated perspectives of the design process.
I had a couple of questions written down to ask, but then you kind of answered like three of them at the same time.
Okay, great.
But that's okay. That's good because I can kind of tie it into another one.
Yeah, I was like, I can elaborate on any of those as well.
That's perfect. So, and oh, by the way, to everybody watching, you guys are welcome to add questions to the chat in the Q&A, and we will pick over them in not right now, but in a couple minutes. But anyway, so yeah, I had one particular question that just kind of leads on to the last thing you just said is, so stadium bowls specifically are giant projects. They're very complicated on all aspects. And I was going to ask you something along the lines of like, given their scale, how can data meaning all the logistics and everything, and program being as in the idea of function, affect the development of these projects, and how can you sort of integrate that through a, I guess, parametric workflow per se?
Right. So, I mean, when I start a project, I'm going to say we're in concept design when we're starting this project, this hypothetical project. But the first thing I'm going to look at is what is the sport, what is the capacity, and what is the intent for this venue, right? So is it a multi-functioning venue? Is it specifically for one sport? So those are initial decisions that you're going to make, which will have a direct impact on the seating. And then, you can use your parametric design tools. So I've built bowl builders at multiple firms that I've been at. Many firms, architecture, structural engineering firms, have bowl builders these days, super common, because it's a lot quicker for us to do the iterations of the bowl design as we're figuring out things like program, right? So an example that comes off the top of my head is I did a renovation project in Asia, in Korea, and we were trying to balance the seating capacity with opening up the bowl to allow for like open air concourses on the upper concourse. So it was a kind of juggling act because we're plugging in new program as we're also designing renovations to the bowl. And so while you're designing the bowl, you can set up in Grasshopper or however you're doing it. Some people do it in Dynamo as well. You can set up like analytics on the side that will tell you, okay, so if I make this design move, I'm now reducing my capacity by 5,000 seats. So you know right off the bat whether that's a move that you can work with or not.
Right. Funny you mentioned the whole concept of like the bowl generator, because we've seen many different firms pretty much write their own bowl generators and all that stuff. So like, and regarding kind of the whole concept of the hackathon that we just had, what are your thoughts on the AC industry moving towards the develop your own tool mentality? Do you think there's an opportunity to sort of inherit tools from other industries and bring it in, or do you think it's something more that we have to merge tools together at some point?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think for designers on the architecture and the capital A architecture end of designing, it's hard for young designers especially to balance learning these complex tools as well as understanding the different ways in which we're going to execute the design. So there's a little bit of knowledge, I think, on our end that young designers need to like learn that, or they are learning it. A lot of people out of school too are equipped with these skills. And some of the education comes with project managers and senior architects to understand the capabilities of these tools and how to integrate them into our workflow and why they're meaningful and important. And at the same time, I don't think designers necessarily need to be running all of the tools and all of the analysis. That's what a lot of specialists and engineers are for as well, where we're not fully, for instance, coordinating a bowl design with a structural engineer, it's really fantastic, even if they have their own bowl design script. I'm writing my own script using my own design geometry, and then we could work together to either figure out how one script works with theirs, or you develop that process together. I think it would be really beneficial if there were some industry standards, like as a starting point in some of the tools, like not plugins that necessarily give you a fully built geometry, but things that kind of get you started, or at least start the collaboration design process between architects and consultants.
No, yeah,
So
definitely.
it's kind of both. I think it's a little bit of, architects learning the tools as well as understanding how to communicate and have a dialogue about the intent of the tools that they're trying to build with other people.
Right. I mean, that's kind of a running theme as well, the whole concept of interop, not just between softwares, but also between practices. Like, I'm working at Thornton Town City, so I have to negotiate between engineers and different design needs of projects, of how it looks like and aesthetics. So it's almost like a double layered question of interop between I guess it's like you said, like architects learning versus sort of people who are more specialized on a particular thing. I guess my question with that is like, is Interop more than just software in that point?
Sorry?
Is Interop more than just software?
Yeah, I think it is. I think I really think it's a large conversation, and it could even tie into the way that we structure contracts in the future. I think some of the old ways that we were structuring our contracts and the way that we're collaborating and working together doesn't necessarily fit within the fast-paced design mode that we're working in like large-scale projects, right? So I've been often met with the issue where I've been told by our team, we're not bringing in consultants during concept, and I'm automatically like, well, this is exactly when we need input, you know? So I think it will be more than just programs. It will be an industry change on how we think about the way we structure our contracts, the way we work with each other, and the way we're presenting these ideas to clients, and potentially educating clients on why these things are important, right? So if we're spending more money up front, there's potentially educating them on like why we're doing that, how it actually saves money on the back end.
Right. Yeah. Clients.
I mean, that comes up all of the time, right? It's like there's not enough time or resources to do what you want to do, and therefore the collaboration suffers. I think as we all get used to these tools and the way that they're working together, we'll get better at that kind of communication through the trades.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. It's really looking at how we talk to each other. Besides, like just looking beyond documentation, it's more of like literally the content that we're sharing. Because at the end of the day, we have to tie it all together into one complex, one entity, the building.
Definitely. And I mean, as somebody who's seen contracts on some of my products before, I'm like, you know, we haven't built on the front end the ability to do these things, right? Because we're thinking about an old way of delivering documentation. So I'm like, okay, well, we've saved all this money for construction documents, but I need it in the front end to build this entire process so that by the time we get to construction documents, we're not spending an exuberant amount of time fixing mistakes that we could have done early on.
Yeah,
So everybody feels that pain throughout the AEC industry, I think.
Oh yes, especially when you hit CDs and you're that's very true. So okay, like that's a big point there because it kind of ties into a lot of different things and it's even a little meta. But so I wanted to kind of talk about the idea of education. So for example, you mentioned the concept of like when people graduate, they come in with a certain skill set, they can manipulate geometry and do all sorts of stuff, but they might not be aware of data as the way we look at it today. In contrast to professionals in the industry, when they start learning things like Grasshopper or any coding, for example, they learn it to understand data and then put geometry second. So I guess, you know, what are your thoughts on, you know, preparing people in academia a little more with the data standpoint, so that way they come in with those skills and we prepare the future generation of AC a little better?
Yeah, I think that comes to, I mean, I went to a very design heavy undergraduate program. And so I feel like there was always a little bit of a back and forth within the studio culture within school that was like people who were thinking about large design moves and people who were thinking about like how to document design moves, which was always interesting to me because I actually grew up around construction. And so I have that background just from my upbringing. So even as a designer, I'm always thinking like, how does this get built in the end, right? Because inevitably, if you're not coming into your design with that mentality, you're gonna have to give up some of your design intent towards the end when the reality starts to set in on how this is gonna get built. So I think if we were able to, even in school, but definitely once young professionals enter the workforce, explaining to them you know, how their design tools can play into the entire design process. So I've done some work, especially at NBBJ and HOK, two of my previous positions, where, you know, I'm educating some of the junior designers about workflow and why that's important throughout the entire design process, from concept design to construction documents. And I'll do that through lunch and learns and, you know, other kind of small lectures. But I think where you really learn it is once you're on project deadlines and people are asking you for real content, you know, producing that content while still trying to come up with your design ideas can be a lot to digest, I think, as a young designer, and they should be shepherded by some of the people who have been doing it within the field already.
Oh, yeah, I 100% agree with that. Sounds fun of my mentor. Okay, we have 3 questions, I think. Yeah, 3. So if you mind answering them. We got one from Charles Portelli, and he said, knowing that stadium models are data heavy and formula driven, can you think of another way to deliver a stadium project rather than just traditional drawings?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that could play into a lot of like what Ilke was talking about too, with using CATIA or other programs that would allow you to potentially bring out shop drawings right away. I don't think the AC industry is just like there yet where we're bypassing the documentation phase. I can see that happening for sure. I've done a project that was a renovation for a convention center and an arena. And that was really interesting because we weren't really touching the bowl, and all of the parametric design that we used on that project was specifically for programming and for the complex facade that we were designing. So even in sports, it's not just about the bowl design. I think something even like complex facades that are data driven, being able to take the data early on and know that you have 10 different panel types that you can then reduce down to 2 or whatever it is, optimization and efficiency tools in that way, I think are really important. But I don't see us being able to bypass documentation anytime soon, especially on a large scale project like sports and entertainment. I think just, that would be the goal on the wish for sure.
So that's definitely an end goal, kind of. Yeah. I 100% that. I agree with that. 2 more questions, and we're running tight on time. But okay, so we got a question from Shannon McMullen. She said, were you initially drawn to working within sports and entertainment projects because you're a big sports fan? If you're not a big fan, do you think that gives you an advantage in working on these types of projects because you aren't too close to the subject and you're free to see them from a wider perspective?
Yes, I am not actually an avid sports fan. I like to joke around that my favorite team is whatever team I'm working with. I think it does help me a little bit. I think a lot of people who have traditionally been in sports and entertainment architecture positions, have focused on sports and entertainment exclusively, and there's a lot of traditionalism. There's a lot of traditionalism that goes. Oh, sorry. There's a lot of traditionalism that goes into the way that things have already been done, right? So especially, again, bowl design is a great example because you get a lot of responses like, this is the way it's always been done. But not being a sports fan or necessarily worrying about the bad corner seats in the bowl or something like that, I come to sports design with a little bit of a different attitude on how to bring a little bit more of equitable design into such a large project type. I think sports and entertainment design is definitely moving towards the avenue where it's a lot more inclusive and they're targeting different types of spectators and viewers, as well as how to flip these venues over to work on other days besides your event days. So what that does, not being a sports fan, is I'm not always focused on just the sport event days. I'm thinking about how do we integrate this building into its site, into the community? How do we offer this back to the community, potentially give people a place to grow their athletes from community sports to all the way to professional sports? I think there's a lot of room for us to really still explore sports and entertainment design without the way that we've looked at it for the past 30 to 50 years. Especially these days, now the pandemic is changing the way that we gather on large scale. Really new, I would say, opportunity in a way to rethink the way that we're designing these buildings.
That's a good point. That's a really solid point. I want to ask about that, but we're right on time. So here's one last question from Craig Dixon, and it says, what are your thoughts on analytics and how they relate to design and architecture? Are we currently taking advantage of data in the AC industry like you think we should? Should we learn more and teach more about data analytics? Being that you are involved in design that is specific to design sports, and smart analytics seems to be so ingrained in sport nowadays and have a lead to quick changes in the respective sports. The question goes, do you think we need to take advantage of analytics similar to AC industry? Sorry, let me try that one more time. Do you think we need to take advantage of analytics similar AC industry and quickly would see benefits?
Do I think we need to take advantage of analytics better in the AC industry? Yes.
Yeah, so that's the question.
I think that early on in the design phase, especially when we're exploring massing and those kind of geometries, it'd be really great. And something that I've been working on actually previously at HOK with Blanca, where we have a design, and let's say we're looking at a new design for a stadium roof and the way that it works, for the seating and the environment that it's in. And so being able to quickly analyze what it's doing for our sustainability aspects informs the way that we're going to design that, right? Because there's no, I would say that it's important to do this kind of things because we are putting these big buildings out there that have such an impact on our environment and, you know, the way that we build them, the way that they function, all of those things. I think doing those kind of analytics, even if they're very basic from the beginning, like just simple sustainability studies or structural analysis, you know, simple things that can help in the early design phases to mitigate changing large structural moves or things like that later on. You know, even just looking at the basic orientation of the building is a big thing.
Very true. Okay, so yeah, we've hit time. So unfortunately, that's it for today.
If
But
anybody does want to hear more about pandemic courses or, you know, how we're approaching stadium design during these times, I've done a sports hackathon that I have available. I don't know how I can post that to everybody, but I could probably put it in one of the chats.
yes, you should definitely show. That's a great topic that we haven't touched. But yeah, thank you so much for talking and telling us all sorts about sports design.
Thank you.